A few months ago, we could exchange a high five or a fist bump freely with a friend, a hug or a kiss to a loved one, and a formal handshake to seal that business deal. The handshake has been one of the most important gestures of peace and friendship around the world. But thanks to the coronavirus pandemic, things have changed. The health crisis has put a halt to the handshake and almost every other gesture of socialization that involves touching. But is this the end of the handshake as we know it? Will the pandemic groom a generation of antisocial germaphobes, or will our social nature blossom even more once the lockdowns and restrictions are lifted? Our limited podcast series After RONA explores the future of humanity. Here is Patrick Gatua with episode 1, The Handshake After the Coronavirus Pandemic.
Thank goodness for the handshake, the king of all greetings, that well-recognized hard-to-mess-up sign of comity and cooperation. So powerful is the handshake that it allows two strangers to collide in a brief moment of trust. We use greetings for inclusion, to make us feel part of the group, one of the gang. Truth be told, there's a feeling of acceptance that comes with shaking hands, an assurance almost that everything is okay.
The handshake is a traditional way of acknowledgement. When you meet someone, you stretch out your hand. Number one, it's acceptance that I know you or I'd like to know you. And number two, it's a way of just showing that we are cordial and we are okay with each other, because you have to trust someone to give them your hand. Like now you're seeing people don't want to shake hands because of, this problem.
That's Kenouko, a professor of sociology at the University of Nairobi. He explains how deeply nuanced this simple greeting is, especially in modern African societies.
Like if you look at the Luhya community in Kenya, they shake hands with a lot of vigor. Like when they meet, they do, the Luos will hold your hand until they ask you where all your relatives are. They're still holding that hand. And then the Kikuyu are very brief with it. They shake hands and they, so it's got a cultural root pathway that it follows. When the politicians came in, they looked at the handshake as an origin of rubber stamping an agreement. So that if we are talking about something, then we finally say we have agreed, and you stretch out your hand, and that is a sign of saying deal done or done deal.
But let's face the truth. For all its convenience and worth, the handshake has also been a petri dish of germs and grime. And now that the coronavirus has put a halt on the pleasantries, it does bring up the question of whether we'll need the handshake anyway. Now, to answer this question, you need to go back in time and trace the origin of the handshake. And I mean way back. Some people date it back to the 9th century BC, where the Assyrian king Shalmaneser III is depicted pressing the flesh of the Babylonian ruler to seal an alliance. But the most popular theory is where the handshake was used as a gesture of peaceful intentions, where by extending their empty right hands, strangers could show that they were not holding weapons or bore ill will toward one another. And I'm sure you're wondering, why is it that when you shake hands, you have to move the other person's arm up and down, right? Well, that was to ensure that the other person wasn't hiding any weapons up their sleeves. Genius.
But the handshake became a very popular tradition, and that's what folkways are. They are popular traditions whose explanations are a bit hazy. But then when it was taken up by the politicians specifically, especially during the Boston Tea Party, those days in America, then it became symbolic.
To forgo the handshake would be akin to asking humans to cease seeking another kindred spirit. It would mean erasing cultural histories that have been in place for centuries. Handshakes have defined some big moments in diplomacy and in politics. Historian and author of the book Humankind, Rutger Bregman, doesn't think we have anything to worry about.
No, I don't think you can ever kill the handshake or the hug, especially not the hug. People are hardwired to connect with one another. We have a deep biological yearning that is the basis of millions of years of evolution, that we just want to touch each other and want to feel each other. And that is exactly why this period feels so strange, right? You really have to force yourself not to be near other people.
But Professor Oko thinks the reality of the health crisis will definitely take a toll on social life, and that some cultures may have a harder time than others.
Now, African society is going to be most affected because if you look at the Western cultures, the handshake is not a big thing for them. And most of the times they do that, and especially the girls, they'll probably give you the tip of their fingers. But when you come to Africa, it has to be firm. For both men and women, when you shake hands, it shows that I trust you, it shows that we are together, we know each other. And so the African continent is still, in a mix regarding this COVID thing, because it's not just the handshake. There are a lot of things that we are being told not to do, which are very African. Yeah, and so people are sitting and looking at each other and thinking, okay. But the utmost result is that usually something has got to be phased out. And even after COVID ends, if it does, and if we find a cure, you realize the handshake has taken a beating and people will be like, hi, the story has ended there, because that's what usually happens with human behavior. That evolution needs a trigger. Something triggers and stimulates it, it's gone.
The ingenious beings that we are, people have come up with innovative ways of exchanging greetings, from elbow bumps to foot bumps, and somewhere in the Middle East, believe it or not, even a butt bump became a thing. It's an indication that even if the handshake as we know it does disappear, a form of replacement will emerge.
The thing that happens with society is that human behavior is constantly evolving. What a lot of people don't know is that evolution, like if you look at fashion, there's something that triggers it. In fashion, it's a classic example of a folkway. It is something people will follow for a while, and then after at a certain time, they say, let's move on. Now, before they move on, there's usually something that triggers that change. You find a guy in town, for example, walking in shoes of two different colors, and maybe he just made a mistake when he left home. He didn't know. But then when he gets to town, he realizes it's too late, I can't go back home. So he walks around like that. Somebody will see it and think, anyway, that's not so bad, and then he'll also do the same thing tomorrow. Before you know it, it's become a trend. And that's the same thing with greetings. The way you say like hi or hello or how you doing, and then the way somebody else replies. All those things are evolved forms of behavior. Now, what usually happens is something comes along the way that changes what you people do and what you have taken as conventional action. And so if you've always been shaking hands, and then one day you see on TV, for example, somebody whose hands have an effect on somebody else, then you tell your children, don't do it anymore. The children go and tell their friends, and their friends tell their friends. And that's the impact of things like now COVID-19 comes along, and one of the first things the medics are telling you is that we can transmit this thing through the fingers, through the palms, through the hands. And so everybody's like, okay. And then the culture itself is immediately ventilated. And so people say, okay, we used to do that, but now let's use the elbows, or let's just acknowledge each other with a wave. But when these things start changing like that, then we have to now adapt. That's the most difficult part of human existence, because when somebody tells you, stop shaking hands or stop hugging, and then you meet your girlfriend and you're like, oops, then it's already done. Or you meet your brother, you've not seen him for like 3 weeks, and you've already stretched out your hand, then you realize, it's not supposed to happen like that. So things like pandemics, things like politics, things like commercial behavior like advertising can easily trigger a change.
The fact of the matter is that social interaction is so important but taken for granted by so many of us. The lack of social interaction doesn't just cause loneliness, but can cause a variety of health issues in the long run. So what is the future of the handshake post-COVID-19?
The beautiful thing with the handshake is that, again, it's not limited to Africa. It's a universal concept. And the handshake is usually a sign of warmth, a sign of human cordiality and amiability. And so if people have got to get rid of it, they'll probably have to find a replacement. Now, that's the fascinating part. What is society going to do to replace the handshake? But I can't say for sure that it will probably just disappear, because there are some forms of behavior that are very unhealthy, but we continue with them. FGM, circumcision itself, a lot of things that we do, even removal of teeth among the Luos, which has kind of now, gone down, wife inheritance. These are very risky things, especially during HIV and stuff like that, but they have persisted, and that's the nature of human life. But for the handshake, I am seeing a shaky wobble into the future, because then it's not just COVID. You're being told the hands is a pathogenic bomb. It's a way of passing on bacteria, viruses and stuff like that. So you'll be training your children and saying, when you go to school, just do that and whatever it is. And so we might have to recreate the fashion, and we might do the fist thing. You might find a way of clamping hands. So I think we'll have to renegotiate socially about what to do with the handshake.
The inevitable fact is that the handshake has survived many moons. Shaking hands has been part of our history and culture. And despite the social distancing measures in place, the gesture of shaking hands may evolve with the changing times.